Those that are just joining this morning, thank you for joining us. My name is Andrew and I'll be moderating today's conversation. I'm just watching the numbers of people join, and so we'll get started in a few moments. It is a pretty exciting conversation today and perhaps one of the most topical intersections when it comes to privacy right now. So we do have a lot to cover, but just while everyone starts to join, after 2 years of working from home and being indoors, I'm sure most of us are pretty comfortable with Zoom by now, but just the pieces to point out, as always, is the chat function and the Q&A. So that's how I'll keep an eye on. If you have any questions for the panelists today, I'll use that to weave that into the conversation. Perhaps to get the chat moving as people join, just tell us where you're kind of joining from today. Mikhail, good to see you back. I know you've been to a few of our events, so we were so excited that you could join today. I am joining from San Francisco, so I'm going to post that in there and check that it's working. Perfect. So I think we've got a few more people joining now, which is great. So we can probably move into getting things started. So the next 40 or so minutes are going to go fast, but thank you for joining us. It's a virtual session today on exploring this intersection between modern data analytics meets data privacy and privacy tech. If you're new to Transcend, welcome. We're the company that makes it easy to encode privacy across your tech stack. And we're big fans of this sweet spot, I guess you'd call it, of where privacy meets technology and engineering. So it's a conversation we're very excited to host. My name is Andrew Moon. I lead the editorial team at Transcend. And as I said before, for those who are joining, I'll be moderating the conversation between Dunn Navarro from Amplitude, who we're so excited to have, and our own Brook from Transcend. As I said before, super interesting area in privacy right now. And just in the last couple of weeks or two, we've seen news out of Europe that's really brought to the forefront, and Austria specifically, that's brought to the forefront how privacy and analytics interact. But we will have plenty of time to go into that and a couple of other storylines before we jump into some of the principles. But first, before we get into that, I wanted to give a couple of moments to introduce our panelists, to introduce themselves. So Heather and Ben, I would love if you could just give us a bit of insight into your background, how you end up working in privacy, and just a little bit of background on your respective companies and the solutions that you offer in this space.
Sure, I can jump in, Ben, if you like. Nice to meet everyone or see you here this morning. My name is Heather Dunn Navarro. I'm very excited to be here with our great partner Transcend, and thank you for inviting me to participate in the conversation. I come from a legal background. I've been practicing law for more than 15 years now. I started primarily in the litigation field, but always included litigation around privacy issues and unfair and deceptive trade practices. And as my experience and practice grew and evolved, I found that how dynamic the privacy field was and how quickly the world of privacy was evolving, that it just sort of was the passion more than other areas. And so I leveraged that knowledge base and that sort of risk management skill set into an in-house practice focused on product and privacy counseling, where I've really enjoyed working with a core team cross-functionally for one mission and thinking about how privacy impacts all aspects of the business.
Awesome. Well, so excited to be here with you today, Heather. So, hey everybody, I'm Ben Brook. I'm the co-founder and CEO here at Transcend. The way I got into privacy is maybe a little bit different. My co-founder and I are both, we both have technical backgrounds. We both actually met in college when we were studying computer science together. I'm born and raised in Toronto, Canada, but we were studying together at Harvard in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And we kind of were working on all these different personal projects together. And one of them is how we sort of stumbled upon the concept of data rights. And we actually were just kind of nerding out on our own personal data and wanted to study ourselves. And so we tried to actually get a copy of our personal data. And this was pre-GDPR, pre-CCPA. really every sort of like what we think of as a modern privacy law now. And so we were essentially just sort of turned away across the board when we would go to virtually any company and say, hey, can we get a copy of like all the data you've collected about us? And you know, at the time that was like a ridiculous thing to ask, but it sort of stuck with us that as consumers, it feels like something that people ought to be able to do, and to be able to have some degree of control over their personal data. So we welcomed the new privacy laws as we started seeing them be drafted and then passed and then coming into force. And as we started really like immersing ourselves in this world, we realized just how large an infrastructure gap there was between what the laws require and what is actually technically possible inside a business. And so as data is distributed and is collected and then distributed internally across internal data silos, as well as a set of vendors, be it analytics partners or advertising tools, or you know, your Salesforce account or what have you. What we find is companies have a very wide breadth of silos of data, and the prospect of efficiently being able to provide data rights to a consumer, it's a very hard problem. And so we initially sought out to solve that and help businesses automate all of the processing of a data rights request. And we believe that in doing so, and by making it a fully automated process, we are cultivating a reality in which data rights are exercisable by all of us as consumers. And ultimately, our mission is to make it simple for businesses to give their users these privacy choices. So that's what got us into Transcend, and really excited to be here today and talk with Heather about one particular silo that we see a lot across our customers, and that's Amplitude, and how we've managed to automate privacy requests with you all. So glad to be here.
Awesome. We have two platforms meeting today. We have two different sides of the brain meeting on this topic today. So I think it's going to be a really good conversation as we chew through these topics. So thank you both. For everyone joining us, just to give you a bit of an outline of how we're thinking of structuring today in terms of the conversation, I want to start us off at the macro level and take a look at the privacy landscape today, what is making this topic and this intersection so urgent, including some of the developments I talked about before. Then we'll jump into key principles for balancing both the visibility into the actions your users are taking, and really the power and what the Amplitude platform is so great at, of deriving this business intelligence from what the actions your users are doing, and the privacy laws that they're covered by or they're about to be covered by, and how you can kind of find the balance between the two sides. Finally, we'll get into what brings us here, as Ben kind of alluded to, and that's this Amplitude and Transcend partnership and integration, so that you can really ensure you've got the best tooling for business insights while also staying in compliance without the legwork. As I mentioned at the top, Q&A button, chat, I don't need to repeat that, but I'll keep watch on those. If you do want to jump in, please do. To kick us off, I'm going to launch a couple of quick polls now to just help us tailor the conversation, get a bit of a sense of where everyone's joining from. So let's see if I can multitask here. So you should see two questions. The first one is, what team are you joining from today? You might actually see one question. So I'll do this one now, and then I'll ask the second one a little bit later or after this one. But this is really useful. So I think we can see here, beautiful. So we have a good mix. We have predominantly legal, bit of representation from product, marketing, engineering, and then a bit of the other bucket. So that is a good insight. So I'll think you can all see the results of that. So I'll get that one out of the way. And then I think I'll ask a second poll quickly here now. And what I'm interested in here is really what keeps you up at night when it comes to this intersection. Is it visibility into the how and the what of the data that you collect? Is it kind of knowing a bit more about how to use user behavior for business decisions, really the strength of Amplitude? Is it kind of thinking about translating privacy regs into data controls, or something else? And I can see that we have most people having answered that one already. So I'm going to hit there and we can see that it is perhaps the bucket around translating privacy regs to data controls is the most interesting area, but I think we've got an equal mix of the other ones too, just in second place. So thank you for that. That's really useful just as we think about the conversation we'll have today. Now, with that, let's get into this first chunk, which is the bigger landscape. And I wanted to start first in the US, and then we can kind of zoom out to our dear friends joining us from Sweden and elsewhere, because I want to talk about Europe too. But starting in the US, number of privacy bills in various forms of play, discussion at the federal level. We know that the states are not waiting around. We have a big wave coming in 2023. I believe California, Colorado, and Virginia are kind of coming into force. And there are a number of other states looking at this topic, unsurprisingly. Heather, I wanted to start with you on this one. As someone who has that legal background, you've kind of come in-house and you're serving as the translator really of what's evolving for your product teams, for your operational teams and marketing. What are you seeing on the privacy bill front? What states or are you looking at? Like, how are you kind of keeping track and what's kind of top of your radar as you look at what's happening?
Yeah, great question. And certainly a quickly evolving and changing world. It's almost hard to believe that the first sort of US-based comprehensive privacy law at this level only passed less than 4 years ago now, and has only been in effect for just 2 years with all the evolution we're seeing. So I think first and foremost, as you mentioned, now with Virginia and Colorado having passed new laws and CPRA coming into effect, sort of evolving and expanding on the rights and obligations of CCPA already, companies really need to be thinking this year sooner rather than later about how to prepare for the shifts and additions that makes in their world, right? You know, there's a look back in CPRA to January 1st, 2022. So you don't want to sit and wait until the end of the year to start thinking about your compliance, even if you've already been mindful of CCPA. And then, as you mentioned, you know, there's some new important elements of it to be mindful of in your business, and that can really impact how you have handled your data subject requests to date. There are new protections for sensitive personal information, sensitive PI, and consumers have the right to limit the use of that information and opt-outs there. There is expansion of the I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. The expansion of the California residents' privacy rights provided in the CCPA. There's also the right to correct your information, which will be new this year. So companies need to figure out how to manage those requests through their data subject processes. We're now seeing the creation of a new standalone privacy enforcement agency here in California, which will be the first of its kind. So we can certainly expect there will be a heightened review of companies' compliance with these processes. It's got to fund itself in ways, and so we'll likely see some more fines. So it's not a time to sort of be ignoring these considerations and to really make sure that it's front and center in your business's approach. And there's also an expanded private right of action in CPRA. So there's broader consumer actions that you need to think of in your exposure analysis as well. So all reasons why it's so important to be thinking about it. Virginia and Colorado add to those in some areas and overlap. I think when businesses were starting to think about CCPA compliance and how to roll it out and respond to data subject requests, a lot of companies were considering whether their policy was going to be to adhere to those requests for California residents only, where the law truly applies, or if they would apply that more broadly to all of their consumers and end users, and maybe as sort of part of their trust principles and building that relationship and trust with their users. Now, don't really have those choices, right? The laws are expanding, and as you mentioned, Andrew, this is just the start. We saw this with the state data breach notification laws, and we're hopeful we would see sort of a federal level legislation on that. And unfortunately, it didn't evolve that way. We now have all 50 states with their own state data breach notification laws. But from a consumer privacy rights and these comprehensive privacy bills, it's even more complicated from a compliance perspective. Like you said, over 25 states have all had some level of bill proposed and being considered in committee review or task force review. And so we can expect to see this landscape and patchwork of laws continue to evolve, and ways to automate and scale your processes of compliance, including with data subject requests, I think is going to be really critical to businesses in their scaling.
That's such a good segue into a question I wanted to ask you, Ben, and Heather, your point around don't thinking you could kind of put this off, because California in particular has that kind of look back piece in it, meaning that like really the clock has started ticking. Ben, as you kind of look from a technical lens at that patchwork of bills that are starting to both come into force next year or are being considered, are you seeing much variance between the rights they mandate and the technical implications, or how companies will need to think about like what infrastructure or what the tech stack needs to accommodate?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the upshots of this sort of splintering of legislation in the United States, as each state has a different privacy law. As Heather, like, I thought that was a fantastic answer, by the way. It was very comprehensive and shows just the portrait of how quickly this is splintering. Within two separate privacy laws, you may actually have conflicting language. And so on the technical level, that means we actually have to be able to understand the region of the data subject or the end user making a request, because that actually may require special handling of their request or of their data. And so we're starting to see different types of opt-outs, for example, across different states. And so in Virginia, the data right du jour is opt-out of behavioral advertising. It's like a very specific purpose for processing, as they would say in GDPR, that is like now regulated. And so that variance means, like, if you imagine the sort of workflow tree, where before it may have been like, are they in California, yes or no? Now it's like, what state are they in? What rights apply here? How do we have to like message that across our vendors? How do we like create new signals that can talk to that? And so there's just an ever evolving and compounding degree of complexity on the workflows themselves. And so it's really important to have a framework that can handle that degree of complexity and hopefully simplify it for you. And then of course, the last thing that's unsaid is that as more and more states come online and more nations come online, not only will we see fragmentation, but we'll also see growing volumes of requests as folks increasingly get data rights around the world. And just one other thing I think is worth noting here is, I think some folks are holding out for a federal privacy law and hoping that it sort of just washes away all the complexity within the states. I actually don't know that will necessarily happen. So it's still up in the air whether a federal law, which I believe will pass, whether that law will actually preempt state laws. And so we don't really know whether that complexity is going to go away. What a federal law may actually do is just set a floor, like a minimum standard for states that don't have laws. And that will include data rights, but states may actually go further with their laws and say, we also require this or that opt-out, or this or that time period in which you must respond, or this or that like special class of data where we have particular protections. And so within the United States, that complexity, I believe, will stay with us. And then, of course, on the global scale, it's not even a question that there's already that complexity between GDPR and CCPA and so forth. So
I was going to ask you both if you would place a bet on when we might see a federal bill, but perhaps the answer is wait and see.
Pretty much, yeah. There's like maybe 6 bills on the floor, or there's 6 bills probably being drafted right now. But I think we're probably still a couple of years from a law.
I think we will see more movement on that, or more success in some of that, those discussions, as we see more states, sadly, come online with their own laws, and it just creates a complicated and difficult framework for businesses to figure out how to comply with. Where I do think we might see some more activity from at the federal level right now is perhaps in like specific sectors or areas of technology. We're seeing a lot around AI and potential regulation. But I also think some recent activities, or I'm hopeful anyway, some recent activities will really push the Privacy Shield framework discussions forward, and we'll see some progress there. That's
actually a perfect segue, and I like the positivity to that. It can feel a little bit not positive when you think about just how fragmented and complex things are getting. And that was kind of a good segue, Heather, to I wanted to think a little bit about Europe, and there's been a lot of movement there, as I kind of touched on at the top, and particularly very recently in regards to this topic. And Ben, I wonder if you could just give us a bit of quick background on this case that's coming out from Austria's data regulator around kind of the use of US platforms for kind of monitoring, like tracking user analytics and things like that.
Yeah, so many of us may have seen that decision out of an Austrian court, where essentially this is sort of in line with the data transfer complaints coming out of the Max Schrems None of Your Business group, who's essentially filed complaints across dozens or hundreds of like topics, but a lot of this is based on data transfer from the European Union to the United States, where the United States is not really considered a what's the term? It's like adequate. They haven't met the adequacy requirement, and a lot of that, it's weird. It sort of boils down to like the ability for the U.S. government to basically get pull data from cloud providers without warrants. And so it's like the Cloud Data Act is basically preventing the US from getting being seen as adequate in the eyes of the European Union. And so the Schrems cases are generally litigating data transfers from any sort of EU controller out to a US service provider or data processor. And the Google Analytics case seems to be a decision that's essentially saying it's not legal to transfer this analytics data to the United States. But I think we're basically in the very, very, very first inning of data transfer conversation here. Schrems 2 came out, invalidated Privacy Shield, and then we saw SCCs come out, and now the SCCs like change every few months. And so like there's definitely an effort to find a way to make this work, and it's just like it's moving under our feet very quickly. But yeah, sorry.
No, that's totally what I was going to because it's a great segue, Heather, to something I think you flagged this when we were talking about this earlier is, Ben, I like you said there about the positive pressure, because people are thinking through this and want to make this work. The SCCs are kind of evolving. Heather, what's the latest there, and how are these being implemented? How are they evolving in the interim until perhaps we see a privacy shield replacement in place that makes this just a whole lot easier?
Yeah, so in June of this year, the EU Commission issued an updated SDCs, partly in response to Schrems 2 the prior year. It sort of refreshed the standard contractual clauses that had been in place for a number of years, or the framework and guideline for them. And in addition to adding various modules, depending on the type of relationships associated with the transfer, whether it was controller to processor, processor to processor, or whatnot. It also was meant to address and added provisions specific to Schrems 2 and to provide more framework around that. Interestingly, this Austrian decision was the facts of the case involved the older standard contractual clauses. So there are so many different aspects to it, but one thing that'll be interesting to see is if, as it, like you said, we're in the first inning, if the later innings are going to approach it and look at it under the new clauses.
One question that just popped up before as we think about like the relationship between US and Europe as it pertains to privacy is, will GDPR be a superset to all the local US compliance regulations, or how might those kind of two interact?
Well, I think we see it as a framework for a lot of them. You know, the Virginia Privacy Act and the Colorado Privacy Act, unlike the California's iterations, really adopted language more akin to GDPR. It refers to personal data instead of personal information, controller and processor in lieu of service providers, and things. So I do think that it sort of is the framework, and honestly, even beyond the US, I think we see most countries sort of using it as its baseline as well.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, jump in, Ben.
Oh, yeah. I was also gonna just say, I think spiritually, it's the superset. Like it's probably the most like privacy forward, and like all of the principles are like, it's the bedrock of I think any sort of other privacy laws principles. But the devil's in the details in terms of like whether, like, you can't just comply with GDPR and never read like the CCPA, because there's a lot of specificity that comes out of American laws, where we'll say like which GDPR is very broad in general and says like, here are the principles, and like there's a lot of sort of room for interpretation in the law, whereas the US law is like, if you look through CCPA, like it's like down to like the verbiage you need to use, like, and so you definitely, it's not a perfect superset, but it is like spiritually like the bedrock, I would say, of everything else.
Yeah, that's a very important point. Sadly, there's no one law you can base your compliance program off of, and it makes sure that will tick the boxes for all the others out there.
Yeah, very true. Well, as a testament to how many facets of this topic are, we're already running slightly behind, so I'm going to keep powering through into our next section. That's really thinking about privacy, analytics, and visibility, how you start to operationalize those and ensure they can kind of really exist in harmony versus one sacrificing the other. Both these platforms, Transcend and Amplitude, are really focused on putting a lot of this work on autopilot, so you can kind of really just focus on the more strategic work, whether it's deriving insights from these user behaviors to make business decisions, or really putting your privacy first program on autopilot so your teams can focus on the more strategic work. So Heather, I wanted to start with you on this one too, and maybe sticking a little bit big picture. One area you've been thinking about a lot is data minimization as kind of a principle in this space. How have you approached going in-house and interacting with all these teams, implementing that at Amplitude, and what recommendations do you have to build a really solid foundation and kind of culture, I guess, there?
Yeah, great question. With everyone's digital footprint growing so quickly and and more digital products and usage out there, the amount of data grows, and the ability to use that data to drive more insights and understand it grows as well. But you really have to be mindful in this landscape of data governance, and data minimization fits right in there. So it's really building a mindset across the company and across like a privacy ethos at the core to be mindful of that in everything we're doing, from our own like internal business practices, and especially to the products we're building, and to enable our customers to further that ethos and process for them. And data minimization is one of the key topics we talk about regularly here at Amplitude. You know, think about and put some rigor into the data you're using and the data you need. And we're all using numerous tools and things to help us build and scale our business, but there should be a process for and consideration given to what data is shared in that process. And now we have obligations and onus to be transparent in that process, and to be diligent in following up in requests, and to making sure we're mindful of that. And all of these things, especially data minimization, is going to help you sort of be nimble and responsive and maintain compliance.
Something that I think is quite connected to that is, and you alluded to it, is this idea of mindset, right? And I wanted to touch on the idea of building a privacy culture, because I think that even goes above the idea of, do I need to gather this data? Do I not need to gather this data? But what have you learned, and what do you put into practice, in terms of building a really healthy privacy culture, and what are the core components of that in the organization?
I have found, and I'm always sort of pleasantly surprised, sometimes from legal, you anticipate or expect that people are going to, think or react negatively, like, oh, I have to do something else just for this or whatnot. But everyone really wants to do what's best and what's right. And everybody's looking to drive compliance and make sure we are acting ethically and properly from a legal perspective. And so it's even just the awareness and the building of the awareness, whether it's trainings or office hours, or sharing of information, internal blog posts, however you can reach your teams and help them keep privacy awareness in mind. They don't always need to know the ins and outs, obviously, of all of it. You have privacy lawyers, legal counsel, outside counsel, you have expertise available for that, but making sure they're aware of where those obligations fall and the various ways it can come into the business, that you need to, how you need to think about it from different portions of your business, even whether that's, in your HR activities, your marketing activities, most certainly. I think Ben is gonna have some good discussion for us on that shortly. And your data-driven, your product evolution and iteration processes as well. And so training, I think, is really critical, and building that awareness and availability, just to even start issue spotting and be comfortable asking, hey, is there anything I need to be aware of or think about here as we go forward?
I love that proactivity of like getting people ahead of it before it's kind of in the background. We have kind of touched on a few times, and we'll touch on it more in a moment, on this role of infrastructure and automating and operationalizing. To mute my Slack because it's going off in the background. But Ben, what about the role of privacy infrastructure here? It popped up in the poll at the start, and we've been talking about it. But we talked this gap between the privacy laws and how companies can actually stay ahead. But could you share a little bit more on that gap and how encoding these controls, connecting these different systems can actually play a role in both balancing visibility with this compliance aspect?
Is that for me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so I mean, at the end of the day, I think we've talked a lot about like just the growing complexity that we're seeing across new privacy laws, growing enforcement, and like overall, just like the stakes are rising every day, and the need has now sort of become abundantly clear. I think that we have to kind of get out off of whatever our V0 patchwork solution may have been. Most companies are on this, for what it's worth, so don't feel bad if it feels like you're doing a lot of stuff by hand still. But as that temperature rises, it's really important to start looking for the right framework that you can basically have a long-term solution to these data rights laws, where you will never stop getting privacy requests for access and erasure. You will never stop having the need to get consent for various things. You'll never stop having to basically assist users as they exercise their data rights every hour, every day. And so this should sort of scream like, this is like a product feature. This is not like legal people running around doing stuff every time. This is a product feature. And so how do we encode that? How do we govern that data? And how do we actually start connecting our data systems to something that can offer these data rights? And that's really what we focus on providing at Transcend. I think, Andrew, we can sort of segue over into some of the partnership that we have with Amplitude, because I think that's kind of where I'm going anyway. So I have some slides where we can sort of actually talk about the meat of like what this partnership is and what exactly we're doing here with Amplitude. So I'll pop over into this slide deck. So I think most of us know Amplitude for the incredible product analytics platform it is. Transcend is the privacy platform that makes it easy to encode privacy across your tech stack. And so that means connecting to all of the various data systems you have, be it an internal database, a warehouse, S3 bucket, you name it, as well as any sort of third-party vendor you may have, including systems like Amplitude. And with the integration between Transcend and Amplitude, you're actually able to completely automatically govern the data inside of it whenever a user makes a data rights request. So if they want access to their data, they can see that actual Amplitude data that you've collected about them. If they need to delete their data, you can delete that data. If they want to opt out or provide consent, that can control the flow of data into Amplitude. And so the upshot of this, of course, is reduce risk. We're allowing product teams to basically reduce the security risks involved in collecting user data and really make sure that data is handled accurately. It really reduces the ability to have human error. There's also, of course, resource savings in the fact that we are efficiently automating the process of automating or of accessing data, deleting it, opting out, et cetera. Again, this shouldn't be like a lawyer's time doing this by hand. And ultimately, we're providing this coverage across your data systems without adding complexity to your process. So we can connect to like the deepest parts of Amplitude and really find all of the customer data related to a given data subject and orchestrate those requests. And so it's very simple to set up the Amplitude integration with Transcend. It takes probably less than 60 seconds. I bet I could do it. You essentially log into Amplitude, get your API and secret keys. You then go into Transcend and connect Amplitude and choose which data you would like to govern. And after that, you're ready to go, and Transcend is able to automatically compile a person's data whenever a privacy request is made in Amplitude as well as your other systems. And we'll flip over to a couple just views of the dashboard. So of course, we can learn more at our integration page for Amplitude, transcend.io/amplitude. That's over here, where we have more details on specifically what we're doing inside of Amplitude and how to set up that integration and test it. So essentially, just repeating, all you have to do is go in, click connect Amplitude, drop in the appropriate keys, and then you should be able to actually take access requests and automatically respond to them. So this is just like a very simple example of like something that we've pulled out of Amplitude. So this is actual activity data that's come out. Would love to help you try this out and really improve the process around your privacy requests. And if you have any questions, please do reach out to us. And again, over here at transcend.io/integration/amplitude, you'll find more details about that.
Awesome. Thank you, Ben. I also just shared a link in the chat, which is something we published a little earlier this month with the Amplitude team, which is just a bit of a background on the whys of the partnerships and how to set it up. And I believe that link that Ben just shared is also a link from there. So there's plenty of information there. We have 4 minutes to go, so I thought I might squeeze in a couple of quick questions before we wrap. I mean, I'm sure we could have happily sailed through to midday on this topic because there are so many different intersections and ways to talk about it. But to jump to a couple of quick questions, Heather, I think this probably is a great one for you. Small but mighty privacy team trying to work out how to get higher ups on board with the importance of taking this seriously. I think they kind of get the most urgent, but don't get the bigger picture. Thinking spanned, head count. Any tips on making that case?
I think when they understand the potential exposure risk and how that is constantly evolving and grows regularly as we see new laws come online and what that could mean impact to business, that helps. But all leadership is focused on customer trust and that privacy and security are the foundations of that. And so I think all businesses should be and recognizing and mindful of how to build that trust and that transparency that consumers and customers expect these days. And I think there are a lot of use cases around that and that can be pointed to or highlighted, even, you know, some of the reputational harm coming out of some of the more public examples where there were, you know, gaps in their privacy or security processes that really impacted the company, or some of these, you know, developments that might be getting customers to shine a light on how use of your products and services are going to impact their ability to comply. You know, your trust story is paramount to your customer relationships. And I think when you frame it in that perspective, they're likely to get on board.
Such a powerful point. Ben, any to add?
I would completely agree. I think at the heart of all of this, we are privacy, and pretty much what we're all doing here is fundamentally based on individuals and their true human rights here, and showing that respect and building that will like truly build that brand trust. And I think that is really important to communicate up to leadership. And I think also one of the I guess intimidating things about privacy laws is that like they're super complex and it feels so esoteric to try to communicate this stuff. When you're in the legal department, there's just like these are big, like scary looking laws sometimes. And I think being able to offer clarity on how this is actually something that is relatively approachable as a solution, where we have, you know, so like really strong frameworks coming out now that actually can make it relatively simple to start addressing these laws and have a scalable program around it, where there's a very practical like approach here. And I think when it comes to leadership, like it's just important to sort of communicate that there are practical solutions to these problems, and you don't need like a 10,000 person legal team with like, you know, a infinite budget to like actually get over this privacy law. Because sometimes it can feel like that, but there are really practical frameworks out there, and that's something that we really sort of try to help our customers leverage Transcend for, is offering just a layer of simplicity and something that can sort of grow with them.
Yeah, takes the manual element out of it, which not only reduces risk, but allows them to scale and manage resources really well.
I think that's a beautiful, beautiful note to end on. I know we're right at now 45 minutes today. Ben and Heather, if people want to get in contact or ask any follow-up questions, best way to reach out to you?
I'm happy to connect. I'm not sure if my email is in the program invite, or you can find me on LinkedIn under Heather Dunn Navarro, Counsel at Amplitude.
Yeah, I'm Ben Brook on LinkedIn, and you can email me at ben.brook@transcend.io.
Awesome. Well, both, thank you so much for joining this conversation today. And thank you everyone that's kind of joined into the webinar. After the event, we will share a few links out. The session is being recorded, so we'll send the recording. If you had to dip out for a couple of moments, you'll get that out in the next probably kind of 48 hours or maybe early next week. But thank you all so much for coming. It was a great conversation, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Andrew.